Hello people, how are you doing? Welcome. My name is Adam. This is Memento Mori. And before we get into the video today, I wanted to do a quick reminder for, a late reminder for the Memento Mori Book to Film Club, a club where every month we read a book and then watch a film adaptation of the book. We're halfway through. We're in month 6 of the club, and the choice for November is Mildred Pierce, the book by James Cain. It looks thick, but this is a bind-up of a few of his novels. The novel by James Cain and the film directed by Michael Curtis. And, you know, here in both November and December, I purposely tried to choose more, and this is more in regards to the films, more accessible titles. With both Mildred Pierce in November and Black Narcissus in December. They're both definitely sort of like comfort watches for me, okay? And this is coming off of 3 months of what, you know, would probably be more considered like art house cinema. If you've been hesitant about joining in, this would be a great month to do so, because Mildred Pierce, even though certainly, you know, it was released in 1945, and it certainly is artistic in all its, you know, noir glory, it is still a classic Hollywood film. And it stars Joan Crawford in her prime. And yeah, it's just a very welcoming film to jump into. And the book too, man, James Cain. If you've never read James Cain, you are in for an absolute treat. Again, just really sharp, wonderful, welcoming writing. And yeah, you will love both the book and the film. So please pick it up with me, and I will be back later in the month to talk about both of them. Moving on, I wanted to discuss a book that was just recently published. I got this through Workman Publishing. The title is 1,000 Books to Read Before You Die, okay, by James Mustich. And James is an editor. He is a former bookseller. He says that this book is kind of 15 years, or has been 15 years in the making. And obviously a list of 1,000 books. It includes fiction, nonfiction, plays, poetry, children's literature. It has everything in it. And in the introduction to the book, he's very clear that this is by no means meant to be a comprehensive list or an authoritative list, but rather just his personal take on the 1,000 books you should read before you die. And he entered it more thinking about, you know, if he owned a bookstore and he could only fit 1,000 books in it to sell, what those books would be. And, you know, we love books on books, right? And, you know, there's a lot of books that have been put out like this. But I'm always particularly drawn to ones like this, which are compiled of one person's opinion. Because I think oftentimes books made up of many opinions or many voices can often result in kind of a sterile and uninspiring list. And for example, you only have to look, just recently, the PBS did the production of The Great American Read, which is a list of 100 books that Americans love, okay? And it was open to the public to vote, and the results were horrifying. They were just horrifying. I mean, it was John Green, it was the Da Vinci Code, it was 50 Shades of Grey. It was scary. And once again, more proof that the world is filled with the wrong sorts of people, okay? But James' list is quite good. It's quite good. And, you know, of course, the first thing you do with a book like this as a reader is you flip to the index and you look at the entire list of books. Not only to kind of gauge where Mustich's taste lies, but also to see how many of your guys made it onto the team. You know, how many authors and books that you love match up with Mustich's list. And especially I'm drawn to the titles past the top tier, meaning once you get through the expected list, okay, of authors and books. So we're talking about stuff like the Bible, Shakespeare is in here with 13 plays. All of Jane Austen is in here. Chekhov, Euripides, Proust, on and on and on and on. Kind of the big guys that you go in knowing will be on the list. It gets more interesting when you get past that to kind of the lesser expected titles. And just to give a small handful of many, in regards to matching up with my own taste, there's stuff like, who do we have here? Christina Stead, Frank O'Connor, my beloved John Cheever is in here, my beloved Muriel Spark, Robertson Davies, Norton Juster with the Phantom Tollbooth, which is like my entire childhood, Betty McDonald, Annie Dillard, Lawrence Durrell, man, with the whole Alexandra Quartet, which 20 years ago might have been an auto-include in a list like this, but sadly not anymore because nobody is reading him. But there's many more, but these are all, you know, people on my team. And I, by no means, I'm not trying to say that they're obscure by any means, but they're not the givens, right? Their inclusion is somewhat unique. And that's really where things get interesting. But even with expected authors, it can be interesting because he'll choose maybe more obscure choices within a famous author's body of work. For example, of course, we have Virginia Woolf in here with 4 titles, 2 of which are nonfiction, neither of which is A Room of One's Own, which is, you know, crazy. And then for her 2 fiction books, he picks To the Lighthouse, which is expected, but then he picks Orlando over Mrs. Dalloway. And again, if this was a popular vote of many people coming together, there's no doubt that I think Mrs. Dalloway is probably her most, you know, famous work. Even though I agree, I prefer Orlando over it. With John Steinbeck, he has 2 titles in the book, one being Grapes of Wrath, again, the given choice. But then instead of Mice and Men or East of Eden, which, side note, I think through time, East of Eden has actually overshadowed Grapes of Wrath and Mice and Men as kind of the biggest Steinbeck, which is strange. But he chooses instead Travels with Charlie, which I think, you know, in some cases there seems to be weird choices simply to boost his nonfiction numbers, but nevertheless still interesting. Finally, I'll mention one more, even though there's endless examples. Again, this is very interesting. Margaret Atwood. Margaret Atwood is in the book with 1 title, which is Cat's Eye, and I don't think there's any debate that the book that put Margaret Atwood into the canon and that will keep her in the canon is The Handmaid's Tale, right? So technically, if you're going to read a Margaret Atwood book before you die, probably should be The Handmaid's Tale. But yet he picks Cat's Eye. If that comes across like a negative critique, it's certainly not meant to, because those unique choices are what makes this, you know, feel like a work put together by someone with unique tastes and unique opinions. And that's what provokes thought. That's what provokes conversation, you know, which is what you want in a somewhat frivolous list like this, right? So yeah, it's super interesting. I think my biggest complaint about the book is the individual entries themselves, which are laid out, they're well written, but they're laid out pretty much like glorified blurbs, okay? They're a little bit sterile. And I think being a book compiled by one person, I would have loved the individual entries to reflect James as a reader a little bit more. So, for example, you know, we know that The Heart of Darkness is important and a sort of a must-read, but what does it mean to you, James? You know, why do you like it? You know, we know that Lord of the Rings is the biggest selling science fiction fantasy series of all time. But when did you first read it, James? You know, what has it meant to you throughout your life? And granted, that's a tall order because we're dealing with 1,000 books. He's given, you know, a page to a half a page per book. So that might not be realistic. But I would have loved to seen him as a reader reflected a little bit more within the actual entries. But I also respect that that's probably not the audience, you know, the book's trying to attract. But again, the entries aside, just the list alone is so thought-provoking that it's certainly worth picking up. Pull it out of your library and flip through it. And man, as a gift, if you know like a young reader who's just starting to get into like adult literature, this would be a killer gift. If somebody handed this to me when I was like 19 or 20, I would have been all over it. And it also makes you think, could you compile a list of 1,000 books to read before you die? I don't think I really could. I think, you know, I'm far too young. Okay, people. I'm far too young, and I have a lot more to read, I think, before I could compile this sort of list. But it's certainly fun to think about. So yeah, 1,000 books to read before you die. And also, side note, James Cain is not on the list, which is a big mistake, Mustich. Big mistake, because he certainly would be on my list. You should read Cain before you die, preferably with me this month as part of the Memento Mori Book to Film Club, okay? But I hope you're all doing well, and I will talk to you soon. Oh, happy Thanksgiving to those of you in America. Be safe, and I will, see you soon. Bye-bye.